Okay, so today's symposium, the theme is Japanese urbanism in an international context. We have the pleasure of having a couple of presenters who will be sharing some of their work today. And we really would like to thank Professor Jordan San for initiating this particular symposium with the support of Professor Almazan, Professor Dimmer, Anastasia, course, Erita and Alejandro, who are doing the technical support, and of course, Keio University for hosting us. So, how the program is going to work is that Professor Jordan San will be the one who's going to be introducing all the presenters today. And then we will go through each presentation. There will be time for discussion. We will have a break and then have the second part of the presentation afterwards. So a little bit of, what do you call it? If there are any technical issues that happen for anyone online, please let us know in the chat. And if you have any questions or discussions, please feel free to use the chat. The Zoom meeting, in its entirety, will be recorded. So if rest assured that the Zoom recording will not be shared publicly unless we get your explicit permission. And usually it's just the presenters' parts which are posted on the Site Japan site. So if there are no questions or concerns, I'd like to pass it on to Professor Jordan San, who will introduce Site Japan and the presenters as well.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody online. Hi, everybody in the room. It's very nice to be here together with you all. I've been asked to moderate. I think partly that means time keep for everybody. And I know from earlier emails that some people are concerned about timekeeping. We'll do our best to keep things moving forward roughly on our schedule. Anastasia and Christian are a duo presentation team and are going to be allotted just a little bit more time in recognition of that, but we want, obviously, as these two themselves have emphasized, we want ample time for free discussion among everyone. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Jessica. So those are just a few comments that provoked me among statements about our aspirations in the past few months as a group. And I'd like to thank the people who initiated the project as a whole and look forward to seeing future iterations and other people in the room and online and beyond contributing in those fora. Let me now turn to Jessica Ilunga, who, as she just told me, the doctoral candidate here at Keio. While residing in South Africa, she did a master's degree in city and regional planning, University of Cape Town. Her research has focused on the role of radical planning in bridging the gap between formal and substantive rights of citizens in Cape Town. She's also involved in social justice education through her work as a learning experience designer with the Mandela Rhodes Foundation and Global Citizenship Program. Jessica, I'd like to ask you to keep within 15 minutes.
Can you see my screen? Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I'm a first-year doctoral student, and I'm really interested in contested public spaces, analyzing the dynamics of resistance, participation, and perceptions in the urban development of public green space in Tokyo. And this is my tentative topic. Today, I'll go through a small introduction, Tokyo and urban redevelopment, Tokyo and the history of urban contestation in the international context. I will look at the case study of Jingu Gaien, looking at the analysis of the steps contestation and the qualitative content analysis that I've initially done. So contestation over public space, particularly green space, has long been a topic of interest to me, and also has been a kind of fascination in terms of the literature around the urban discourse around that. Obviously, there are various scholars and researchers that have explored the dynamics and dimensions around public space contestation, particularly in the context of urban redevelopment projects. And this has evolved over time. But additionally to that, there has been growing recognition of green space as an important aspect of a city in terms of urban sustainability, health, and quality of life. But despite this recognition, green public spaces continue to fall victim to redevelopment and privatization. And this global phenomenon has led to a new rise in public protest and resistance in protecting and preserving these green spaces against corporate-led redevelopment. So in Tokyo, the 2020 Olympics seems to have triggered an emergent pattern of resistance and reclamation of urban space, as the city has and is continuing to undergo urban transformation through large-scale redevelopment projects. And this new pattern of resistance seems to be bolstered by the wave of civic engagement, which came with the momentum that came from the anti-nuclear movement during the 2011 Fukushima nuclear catastrophe. This, however, is not a completely new development of social resistance, but it's a re-emergence after many years of invisibility and other forms of more tactical and maybe passive forms of resistance in the urban space. So in analyzing social contestation, I found it useful to look at Sidney Tarr's concept of protest cycles, where the author says that social movement theory maintains that protests are not randomly distributed over time, but appear in periods of intensified conflict called cycles or waves or campaigns. And this is useful to me to illustrate Tokyo's historical context and the main urban contestations and their factors, which points to this re-emergence of this new cycle. So with the import of, I'm talking now about the history of urban contestation in Tokyo, the import of Western ideologies and modernist systems, there was an admiration of the plaza of large parks such as Ueno and Tsuruma Park or Hibiya Park, which were introduced to Tokyo during the Meiji era. However, the contention process of nation building and social modernization, which were central to the elements of the vibrant yet unstable democratic system of the Taisho era, meant that competing social movements at the time often employed highly violent means of protest in these urban public spaces. So the first significant moment of almost implicit urban contestation was the student occupation of Shinjuku Exit Plaza in 1969. The series of events marked one of the first major reclamations of public space by a group of university students and activists who held gatherings in the area. And although the conservative establishment at the time cracked down on the occupying group due to the increasingly violent confrontation, this event really influenced later literature, which was sort of filled with appreciation and rediscovery of Tokyo's unique urban spaces and vernacular. So despite the growing environmental movement at the time, overt contestations came to an abrupt end in the mid-1970s due to a number of factors. So found that a more invisible civil society formed from the 1970s, and urban protests lost their sort of national political influence and became increasingly socially stigmatized activities. And this was due, among other factors, to the growing strength of the conservative establishment and changes in national and socioeconomic structures, and also the success of the middle-class society, largely influenced by the kind of social harmony concepts of the time and Nihonjin at the time. So civil engagement and urban resistance did not completely disappear, but it did radically transform and diversify. So instead of national confrontations, communities largely pursued strategies of self-reliance and practical cooperation with government institutions, as is evident in the popularity of the literature of Machizukuri in the late 90s and practical urbanism, which grew popularity in the early 2000s. As citizens navigated these political changes which prioritized the economic growth and the central government monopoly, young people who were largely excluded from the earlier middle class lifestyle ideals are largely credited for experimenting with new and radical forms of activism to claim their rights over public urban space. And this enrichment of Japan's protest culture really is the foundation of this new emerging pattern of contestation that we are seeing currently, that are often rallying against the kind of corporate cooptation of Tokyo's public spaces. And this reflected in both the Miyashita Park protest case and currently the contestation of the Jingugayen redevelopment. This reemergence of insurgent citizenship is, of course, not unique to Tokyo. So unlike the global north, the global south cities such as Cape Town may have a more extensive history of visible public space contestation and overt social movements. In South Africa, resistance to urban redevelopment projects are often linked to struggles against the legacy of apartheid spatial planning. However, similar to Tokyo, there exist diverse ways in which citizens, particularly the middle class, oppose redevelopments through these ephemeral modes of campaigning, in contrast to these overt displays of public anger or mass demonstrations, which dominate a lot of the global South literature around spatial justice. Furthermore, due to the growing popularity of decolonial urban thought and its intrinsic tie to environmentalism, there's also an emergent resistance to redevelopment involving green public land in South Africa. So the case of the Two Rivers Urban Park, for one, is an instance where various factors converge, which are influencing resistance against a major redevelopment by Amazon to build a new African headquarters on the public green space. The site, which is located at the confluence of the Lisbeth River and the Black River, is one of the largest urban green spaces in Cape Town and is managed through a public-private partnership. Comparing the Jingugayen and the Two Rivers Urban Park space can allow us to look at these cross-cultural analysis of how resistance to urban redevelopment is expressed, negotiated, and managed in different contexts for just outcomes. This can provide valuable insights into the role of culture, history, and political as well as economic factors that influence public participation of urban redevelopment. So both cases involve an environmentally sensitive area that is privately managed green public space with a large-scale government-approved redevelopment project that is being privately led by a large corporation. So today I'll be speaking more about Jingugayen. In the case of Jingugayen, I'm in the process of exploring how resistance is influencing the participatory processes of the redevelopment project and the factors that are sort of influencing the public's perception of just outcomes and how it compares to those of the government and private corporations. So this is Jingugayen, the outer garden of Meiji Jingu Shrine. It's owned and maintained by the Meiji Jingu Religious Corporation. It's part of Minato, Shinjuku, and Shibuya Ward. It has played different roles throughout history. It was consecrated in 1918 in honor of Emperor Meiji, designated as the first scenic zone in Japan in 1926, and it's currently a public green park with various sports facilities. There are other activities on the site, including baseball, ice skating, tennis, and so on, and other more seasonal events that happen there. So the redevelopment overview is that as a result of the 2020 Olympics, their area was slated since 2015 to be redeveloped with new sports and commercial facilities, with the developer's vision to create a state-of-the-art sports precinct, which will be a legacy for the next 100 years. The project is the vision and collaboration between the main players, mainly Mitsui Fudosan, a real estate corporation, who owns office buildings on the site, and the Japan Sports Council, who maintains the National Stadium and the Rugby Stadium, and of course, Meiji Religious Corporation, who maintains the rest of the facilities as well as the grounds. The redevelopment includes new high-rise office buildings, the replacement of the Jingu Baseball Stadium, and the relocation of the Rugby Stadium, among other major constructions that will take place. So in order to analyze Jingu Gayan's contestation, a useful framework that I found would be to conceptualize what is the nature of the resistance in this case in terms of the roles of the players and their interests, and where a just outcome of the process means a fair and justifiable balance of the interests of each of these players. And with this framework, I hope to uncover the factors that influence the perceptions and resistance, as well as the outcome of the development. So I first started based on the public available documents and media surrounding this controversy to map the different players and their relationships within the controversy, where the public more generally, together with activists and vocal research institutions who are opposed to the development, can be defined as the actors in this contestation, and whose direct target is the Tokyo metropolitan government. The four major players, who are the developers, are the indirect targets of the actors, and disseminate information about the projects through the Tokyo metropolitan government, who it works in close proximity with. The actors, particularly the research institutions, are also in good direct relationships with local and international, as well as the digital media, who play the role of sort of observers of these contestations. So the nature of the resistance is that the actors have used various means of resisting and protesting the controversy. This has been a form of spreading awareness of presenting alternative proposals to redevelopment through press conferences and interviews, as well as online petitions, public protests, by doing awareness work on the site, as well as social media like Twitter, to amplify their opposition. So I did a preliminary analysis of existing data using Keio, which is a software for computer-assisted qualitative content analysis and text mining. And with the help of the statistics and computational linguistics that the software's abilities, it allows you to analyze the interests of the actors through their social media tweets in this case. So I collected publicly available tweets with the keywords Jingu Gayan, which appeared in the span of 1 year from now from February 1st, 2022. And I used the coder to generate a co-occurrence network of words from tweets about Jingu Gayan, of course, written in English, and created sort of this co-occurrence network, which refers to this visual relationship between the different words based on how frequently they appear together in a text or group text, and the size of the nodes represents the frequency of the word in the body structure, and the line of connecting the nodes represent the co-occurrence relationship between them. So as you can see here, this based on these tweets is that the top 6 frequently used nouns which appear after we've eliminated everything is the Jingu, the tree, plan, petition, area, koike, and autumn, and the verbs of protect, rethink, and cut. And when you look at the clusters a bit closer, one of the clusters refers to Governor Koike as a frequent noun with co-occurring words such as speak, question, approve, mitsui. And this can be interpreted to kind of represent the close association that the activists perceive between Mitsui and Tokyo metropolitan government. Governor Koike is associated with speaking and questions by the actors, and the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the Governor Koike, are direct targets of the actors' inquiry. The next cluster is the Ginkgo Avenue, closely associated with autumn and season change. The next cluster around stadium could suggest a tension in the collective narratives of the actors between the need for new and old. And the last cluster is a point of intensity, very closely associated with trees, with words such as rethinking, protection, redevelopment. I conducted a similar analysis for the targets perspective. And as you can see, the targets co-parents network here is less granular than the active network. And this could be because of limited content that's available between the same year span. Or it could mean that there's just more frequency in the same use of the word, and thereby less complexity or variations in the words used for descriptions, as maybe that, as you may often find in official documents, for example. And again, we export the frequently used nouns and verbs that you can see in the left-hand corner. And the main cluster here is sport facility, build, hold, event, which is in line with the aims of the project. And small but close cluster is this create and new. In the orange there. And the last I'd like to describe is the tree cluster, which is closely associated with the words of possible, preserving, trees, and the ginkgo trees. So from this, we can kind of make a preliminary summary of some of the main contestations between the actors and the targets based on sort of subjective deductions of the clusters. And the main ones are that the actors are significantly, they interests are about significantly rethinking the redevelopment closely associated with the protection of trees. The targets is the response is to influence public opinion and public buy-in about the possibility of being able to preserve existing trees, with more emphasis on the ginkgo trees in particular because of their scenic value. And the active side is that there is an interest in wanting to engage directly with Governor Koike through the Tokyo Metropolitan Government as the seeming custodians of all the approvals surrounding the project. And then there were not many words associated with engaging public except through the council meeting cluster. And then, as I've said before, there seems to be a narrative tension within the actors about what old is and what new is, based on the facilities that are there. And lastly, the targets, it's very clear that it's about creating newness and erasing the old. So what's next is that I plan to expand the data to include Japanese language, which the processing of retrieving those tweets is it's large, and triangulate my findings as well, because these are preliminary findings based on the cage coders. So trying to triangulate this through the survey and interview analysis. And I'm interested in also process tracing the redevelopment to clarify at which point the project actually was influenced by the public outcry. And lastly, the data collection and analysis of perhaps seeing the case study in South Africa and the comparisons between the two cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. We're going to press on right away to the second presentation before we take a little time for discussion and a break. We are running a bit behind time. I hope that I can ask Anastasia and Christian to help us catch up. Oh, excuse me. I have introductory. I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Pardon me. Anastasia Gkoliomyti is doctoral candidate of Technology Research, Chemical Laboratory. She's originally from Athens. Has been pursuing cross-cultural studies in Japanese architecture, starting with the Japanese tea room, and since 2019 as part of Chemical Lab, exploring how architects can develop socially engaged design methods in the context of planetary burnout and structural vulnerability of communities worldwide. She's presenting together today with Zimmer Associate Professor of Urban Studies and Transition Design at Waseda, Christian earned PhD at the University of Tokyo, where we were roommates, office mates, working on the emergent public space concept in Japanese modern planning. Also taught at the University of Tokyo, at Sophia, and at Keio University. Has published on urban commons, public and private, and public-private partnership in the city, contestations of public space in urban Japan, participatory governance and placemaking, as well as community resistance. Thank you. I'm going to set my clock for 20 minutes and ask you to hold to it. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So our presentation is a little bit of an experiment. So we're kind of exercising what we try to suggest here with this project site in Japan as well, we came to understand actually that both of our research, what we were doing independently could actually benefit if we would work together. So we're currently working on something with the title Co-Creating the Pluriverse, Immersive Community Design Practices. So a kind of architectural or placemaking design that is more participatory, is more interested in the people who will use the space later on, is also interested in pluralism and democracy to a certain degree, although this is not always explicitly stated. This is just to visualize where we are coming from. So we're seeing on the left-hand side, this is the famous hand by Le Corbusier for the Plan Bozin, tearing down half of Paris. With a sweep of the hand of God. So the kind of modernist idea of the clean slate that has then, through colonialism and so forth, proliferated all around the world to wipe away what we don't like and to build boldly something that is supposedly better. On the other hand, on the other side, we see diverse hands now, ethnic minorities, people who are marginalized, planners, and people of different disciplines working together. And this is something where, for the last 2-3 decades or so, we see this kind of trend. So from a one world to the pluriverse. Pluriverse, what? You ask yourself, the word comes from Arturo Escobar, who's a Colombian anthropologist. And he criticizes that through colonialism, through globalization, through this kind of European American center that came to a standardized version of design, of architecture, of placemaking, and so forth, came to dominate the world, wiping away differences and unifying everything. And contrary to that, he proposes the concept of the pluriverse. This is my favorite topic here. This is the Nihon Kenchiku Gakkai Donbunshu, so the kind of big, I couldn't find a better picture. Usually you get these very thick tomes that are created for these taikais. In architecture, in landscape planning, and in city planning, everyone produces their own, and they all have these nice papers that are 1 or 2 pages long. And the idea that you have to find a whole, somebody must not have done the research. You have to be original. No matter how nonsensical that research is, as long as it is original, that is good enough to research. And this is what we want to break down. We want to find more meaningful work research and feedback to design in order to create something that is better responding to the challenges of the world. We're working with both of us. We came to learn that we're big fans of actor network theory. So we're trying to map actors, actants, and agencies. We're also creating these kind of maps, but also with the understanding this is not just for creating new knowledge and for being original, but it really helps if you have a map, if you know what people are doing in other fields. Maybe they're using different concepts or different words, but actually they are interested in very similar things. A map can help us to bring us into the same picture, and it can give agency as well. We can look at the past, how networks have been forged, and we can learn how we can become better in what we're doing. And this is also something that is very closely related to the SITE Japan project here, creating these kind of networks, really starting to talk to one another profoundly and over time, of course, as well. This is nothing that is very easy.
And what the ANT does is we found it was introduced in urban planning in 2011, and a few years before in architecture by Albena Yaneva and Bruno Latour, and Ignacio Faras for urban planning. And what happens when a common theory exists along disciplines is that it creates a connection. And we use that connection to work together, but also to start including many kinds of people, like angry clients, planning, practitioners, skilled, unskilled, conflicting stakeholders, neighbors, preservationists, clients, representatives. And our undertaking is still a work in progress, but we are trying to put on the same space to make a space very full of information rather than a tabula rasa that can help us have conversations among us and across our disciplines. And in this diagram, what we see essentially is what the Pluriverse for now represents for us, a bridge between Anastasia and Christian personally through our own stories and trajectories, with this symposium, the connection or the plane that connects Japan and the world, and then architecture and urban planning. I will start with mapping my own story that will connect to Christian's story later, by going into my first study when I came to Japan, which was on street observation in Tokyo. And what happened was that I started from the present moment, and then I ended up finding about the work of Wajiro Kon and Kenichi Yoshida, modernology. I'm not going to go into detail about modernology, but the important thing is to take modernology that came out in 1925. I want to show different constellations, different trajectories with topics that include Japan, but also the world and also different disciplines. This is the mapping for today that shows these different clusters. Oh, I was thrown out of the Zoom. That's great.
But the time's mercilessly ticking.
I apologize.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry about that. The connection seems to be wobbly here. But I think this was the slide. You see?
The screen up there, there we go.
We're back to home with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although on the big screen, there we go.
Okay. Yes, I think the connection can take everyone.
Okay. Oops.
Okay, so this is the slide I was talking about when it probably. So yes, why modernology today is important is because of all the affiliations and the connections we find to the present moment, to different places, with different actors. I'm not going to go into detail but I also tried to update the mapping to include Jorge's work and a few other cases introduced by Professor Sand that we can discuss in detail in the future. But the idea is that Tokyo becomes a site of interest because of the unique observations of different groups and people that attempted to make sense of the multifaceted metropolis. So in the beginning, we have all those Tokyo observations from Japanese people, but then the relay race continues from 1995 with a translation of Spatial Anthropology by Gina Hidenobu. An increased interest starts to take place around Tokyo, and then we have more works in English available. And these are all visual works, so it's case studies and field works that have a visual output, and at the same time, we can find already that in these field works, the main role is not always on an architect, but also we have, in the case of Professor Whitelaw, he's an anthropologist from Yale. Another connection that we have, we pivot from street observation, from the observation of the exterior of the city to the interior, to the urban dwelling studies of Uzo Nishiyama. And Uzo Nishiyama directly credits the modernology method for his mappings of interior life of Japanese dwellings all over the country. With Sumikata no Ki in 1965 and residential modernology Sumai Kogengaku in 1989. And then we make a more unexpected connection to William White, which is a result of my communication and our discussions with Christian. We were trying to see how Tokyo is a site for fermentation and for different actors to meet. And then Christian introduced that William White was here actually in the 70s, and he was interested to learn about how Japanese people approach crowding in Tokyo, and he did a comparative study in 1977, here comparing Alexander's and Mitsukoshi. And we have these pivots from street observation to crowding studies. And when I found this original work of 1977, I was very surprised to find that William White directly references Kon Wajiro methodology and Mr. Kon. Observation, my slides are taking a while, sorry. Observation is not a technique that ranks high in US universities, not for that matter in its elementary or secondary schools. Because of this bias, most research tends to be once or twice removed from the reality being studied. For students of street life, as a consequence, there are a few counterpart studies to provide a base for comparison. One fine exception is the work of the remarkable Mr. Kon. Over 50 years ago, he was studying the life of the streets and public spaces of Tokyo. Nothing seemed to have escaped his curiosity, and a lot of us are familiar with the themes, even mapping the movement of ants in a 50 centimeter space. Sorry, yes, I went through that before, but it's about the importance of translation. When in 1995, Tokyo Spatial Anthropology came out, a lot of interest came towards Tokyo, and then we have a boom in Tokyo studies, and even inspiring foreign international researchers to do fieldworks on Tokyo. In the case of Tokyo Totem, in the case of Raymond Lucas, and in the case of Professor Almazan, which I think his work, of course, it's from the past, from all over 10 years, but we can see it here. And I'm here somewhere just trying to map this and show that this exists. And then another site for transmission and interaction is the Venice Biennale of 2018. Sorry, this is a mistake, it's 2018. The Japanese Pavilion for the Venice Biennale with architectural ethnography. It's a crucial site where the work of Kuroishi Izumi, translator of with her Ph.D. on Kon Wajiro, and other actors gets crystallized together with the work of Japanese architects in Tohoku, that they came faced with an once-in-a-lifetime experience for their generation, that they had to advocate or stay close with the communities and use their skills for care, not only for construction. And then in 2018, in the Biennale, it becomes a site where street observation starts to pivot to livelihood study, that also starts to get incorporated into design as a design methodology. And disaster is a moment where we connect with with Christian, sorry. So I give the floor to you.
Okay. We have two storylines, and there is a lot of overlap that we have actually discovered as we have moved on. So for me, my journey starts with community design. I'm by profession an urban planner, not an architect, so I didn't have the architects on the radar. But as we were kept on talking, actually, a lot of very important connections emerged that were there that I wasn't aware of, and that really helped me to gain a better understanding. So in community design, we have our hero here, Miyazaki Ryo, who is the poster child of community design, and he's kind of being branding himself as the person to develop that concept, community design in Katakana. He wrote many books. He's in TV as well. He is received in Taiwan as well. He's teaching community design and also is depicted in Era, in this kind of celebrity magazine. And looking at him, you get the idea that he emerged out of thin air somehow. But then, of course, if you start to dig deeper, this was an event that I attended in 2016, where he actually brought in two very important figures, real community design pioneers in Japan, Hayashi Yasuyoshi and Endo Yasuhiro. And it was kind of interesting to see how it looked like as if he was mapping the field also in order to create legitimacy for his own practice as well by linking to these legendary forefathers. So for us, the sites are very important in order to ferment these kind of transdisciplinary collaborations. I start with my timeline in 1968, but I could go back further if I wanted to, I guess. This is just where we stand at the moment. This is a very famous book here, Nihon no Toshikukan. It came out in around Kenzo Tange in 1968, and top left is the roster of the people who were part of it. So Teiji Ito, famous architecture critic and historian, Arata Isosaki, everybody knows these people. But then looking at it again, I realized we have Hayashi Yasuyoshi actually here. We have Reiko Tomita here, who was the first female architecture graduate from Tokyo University. And we also have Kenichi Omura here, who was a children's rights activist, and who brought the adventure playground from Scandinavia, the wild play, chaos, and so forth to Japan. And they come together in Setagayaku, and in 1979 create Hanege Play Park as Japan's first adventure playground. We have then Isami Kinoshita, community design professor at Chiba University, and Uzuki Morio, who is also a very famous participatory planning professor at Waseda, retiring in a few days. And they came to work here on site. But most importantly, and this is what I want to stress when I talk about Japan, is this kind of political backing here. Oba Keiji, serving almost for 30 years as a mayor here and really taking the back of these people and really carving out this kind of political space where things become possible, even in Japan. And the same we find in Yokohama in the 1960s and 1970s under Azukata Ichio, as well as this kind of local prefigurative politics as a reaction to the Ampo defeat in 1960. So politics play a very crucial role here. One important point here is Tomika Reiko and Akio Hara, who became the first Machizukuri chief in Yokohama. They actually came from the architecture practice Atelier Zo, very famous for their 7 design principles, this kind of sensory, people-centered design, the expression of place, diversity, plurality, people at the center. And they design also in Setagaya, and even also in Tohoku and the art police in Kumamoto. So very important figures and a very important bridge between my community design world and Anastasia's architecture, people-centered architecture world. I'm really sorry for those messy diagrams. I just did that overnight, so I definitely need to work on it. And I don't go into any detail here. The point is, Hayashi and Kinoshita then went to the US. They met with Henry Senoff there, who's one of the first community design practitioners in the US, Randy Hester. Hayashi translated the books of Senoff, design games, bringing this idea of playing games to Japan in order to allow participation. So games as a tool for enabling real participation. And then Senoff and Endo Yasuhiro, whom we met before, and Hayashi then, together with Jeffrey Ho, building this Pacific Rim Communities Designers Network in 1998. Jeffrey Ho also writing, co-creating many books, for example, Insurgent Public Space, where Japanese planning practices and international practices are opened up to a global audience. Yeah, just one short word. You're all interested in Japan, so I shouldn't talk too much about the United States, but I think it's important also to understand that this is a very political thing also in the United States. Under Lyndon B. Johnson, the Great Society and the War on Poverty, based on the work of Kennedy before, important legislations were enacted. Money and programs were put up that encouraged participation and diversity and bringing the marginalized to the table and giving their right. So it's interesting to see how this then travels to Japan, and we're just talking about tools now, no longer about the politics and these kind of very ethical, deeply ethical and political issues underlying that. So I would like to look into this a little bit more, this active translation in the future. So we have a very long list of conclusions here. So we really wanted to bring something also to the table to show that it's not just mapping for mapping's sake and for making confusing diagrams and so forth, but for the sake of time, we won't go into the details here. Maybe we can revisit later on in the discussion parts. The important point is really this kind of co-emergence in the US, in Japan. There's a real-time collaboration on a similar level, symmetrically. Actually, it's not that the Japanese people are learning; they develop their own practices. The Americans learn theirs, and they come together and they co-emerge, co-learn. And this is a very important point. So yeah, I think this is good enough.
And so the role of design here starts to matter because design matters as it materializes. We are well aware with these graphics. What we're not so aware is how we can go from the one to the many. So from street observation to the mapping of diversity or the representation of everyone, and particularly underrepresented and vulnerable groups that have not been part of the discussion actively enough for us to have manuals and materials for many kinds of domesticities, from othering to pluraling, many souths, many norths, many domesticities. Even if we make houses in the Western paradigm and we export it to the Iqaluit indigenous groups, communities in Northern Canada, they're still going to sit on the floor to have their meal. And we need to know that. We need to go back into our designs and to see what works and what doesn't, and to ask people about that.
Yeah, this is the last slide. I hope.
Yes.
I promise. So I just wanted to link back to Sci Japan here. I like the work of Susan Lee Starr. She's a US STS scholar, and she developed this concept of boundary object. So this kind of map, something that is sitting in between many different disciplines, and we all feel somehow linked to it vaguely, and it has the power to bring us together, and it's a means also to translate between different knowledge domains. And it's also something. It's not easy. We've been hearing this for many years, to work interdisciplinarily and so forth, and probably also David remembers we have had these kind of forums in the past, and it's very difficult to sustain it actually and make it real. So and with this we would like to end it and apologize for going over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And it's true, we are over time. We are scheduled to have a period of discussion until half past the hour. Do we need to stick to that, I guess? Or can we assume that discussion is carrying a little longer?
It depends on the reservation later. Sorry. So maybe we can go like just 15 minutes over the schedule.
Yeah. So let's forge through until 6:15, and then take just a 5-minute break.
Okay.
How's that sound?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I'm simply going to open it to the floor, I think, and invite people to, I suppose, raise hands. You can raise a little colored hand online if you wish to. And I'll try and moderate and move things along. And if you wish to ask a question in the chat, that's also available to you. I'll try and keep an eye on that. Please keep your comments and questions relatively brief so that we have an opportunity to hear from everyone. Is everyone on Zoom at the same time?
Yeah.
Zoom. I mean, can somebody shoot it to me on email?
Okay.
I didn't read it for a long time.
Okay.
I asked that because if everybody in the room is also on Zoom, then you can raise your hand on Zoom. It might actually be easier for me.
Yeah.
Have trouble with it.
James.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I'm not on Zoom yet. I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, I missed your name. Jessica, yes. Thank you. Jessica, I really like what you're doing. It's very interesting. And this is a question about methodology, because I'm a qualitative sociologist, right? And sociology is very divided into this qualitative and quantitative camps. And so we tend to be antagonistic. But I wonder why so I think you have this wonderful project and you're doing this you're doing basically this numerical data analysis of discourse. And I guess the question, since you're starting with this, you're going to spend a lot of time downloading an enormous amount of tweets from Japanese and then doing this sort of I guess content analysis that's really sort of based on a kind of linguistic analysis as in a machine-like way. I was wondering, what is the advantage of that as over a qualitative method where you would read those tweets and ask people and say, what are people trying to do here? What are they trying? Why are they attacking Koike? Or what do they want to preserve? I mean, so because the story you're telling us is quite impressive and interesting and really, but I'm wondering why does the methodology work for you? And are you wedded to it?
I think the methodology was more out of personal curiosity that I tried it out. I was interested in seeing, especially because of this sort of new wave of AI that's coming out. And I was just curious to see the kind of results that a machine would have based on like the content that it's reading. But I still plan to do my own analysis of surveys and interviews as well as the tweets. And what I want to do is kind of triangulate like and see like what are the nuances that can come out of looking at both techniques, if that makes sense.
Maybe I should rephrase it this very much more. Did you see anything that doing that quantitative style analysis
Yeah.
or correspondence analysis? Did you see anything there that you wouldn't have seen by reading the tweet? Was there anything that stood out like, wow, I didn't notice that?
I guess what it's helping me to do, which I don't know if this is just me, but it's sort of confirming a lot of the assumptions, in a lot of the analysis that I was already making from consuming the data, but it's almost giving me a little bit of the surprise is the language. That's so let's say the co-occurrence, that it's the word that is co-occurring with another word. Maybe I'm just being, but that for me is fascinating. The language in which I can explain why there is a tendency. Of course, I can explain it from a social point of view to say that there's a reason why they are aiming at Koike and that's their the thing. But I think I'm also interested in what other ways can we describe that the wanting to redirect their and the language they use around like directing their why are they not using Mitsui, for example, because they're also the targets or the developers in this case. So yeah, to me it was more the surprising thing was the language that I used to describe that relationship. Yeah.
For a follow-up. Also, the very interesting thing, two more methodology questions. How long did it take you to digest and map out the English language material?
Oh, a long time. Yeah.
Because at some point, funding for the PhD is probably not funding.
Yeah. No.
And you kind of want to go, okay, I could have had 10 interviews.
Yes.
I mean, not to put too professional a gloss on it.
Yes. Yes.
But everybody.
Yeah.
But a little more sympathetic question is, as we are buffeted right now with all of this AI stuff, isn't there a way to have a larger unit of analysis than the individual lexical item of the word? Aren't you able to do this kind of thing with larger strings and using AI? Because this actually, what you have here is not an AI.
No, it's not.
Right? But aren't we almost at a point where it's possible to retain larger bits of tweets in order to have more than just lexical coherence?
Yes, yeah, it is possible. Yes.
I wonder what that would show us, if that would tell us, or an easier to interpret, a less speculative data.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting concept.
Yes. And on your point, I think about not let's say doing interviews in the time being, I think my curiosity was piqued.
Yes, you have to switch off your. Thank you. Sorry.
I think my curiosity was piqued also because the case study itself is happening live, and so a lot of the people who are involved in this contestation are not readily available at the moment. So it's a plan of like I was going to interview them anyways, but in the meantime, when they're not available, how can I use my time to explore other ways of analyzing the content that's out there? Yeah.
I mean, for many of us, this is the only way to get this happen.
Yeah.
That's a stronger argument.
Yeah.
This is not just a pale version of interview. This is
That's
actually distinctive.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can add, I mean, the issue of methodology, and here there are like many PhD, immediately we jump on it, right? So you are feeling the importance of that, right? So that's why I always mention that also in my seminars, no? The methodology, especially in such a controversial topic, you really need to show that you are not taking any part without a proper analysis, right? So you are saying, and of course you have your position. I know your position, but as a researcher, you are different from those who are like the activists, right? Your position is different. The difficulty now is that the other side is very difficult to interview. They are absolutely opaque, very inaccessible. So how to be? We have a lot of data from the activists, but from the other side, it's almost impossible to get information. So that's the challenge of this project, I guess. So I think you need to find some way to kind of have a kind of balanced position so that you can compare both positions, both arguments, and at the end, of course, develop your own conclusions. Yeah.
Activists are always
Yeah.
They're always right. I have a question regarding your research setup. You have two case studies, right? Cape Town, this movement, and also Myanmar. Will you treat them on equal footing as well? Will you equally look into the Cape Town case study as well, and then try to learn something by contrasting these two cases?
Ideally, that's what I would like to do, but at the moment, I'm trying to focus more on the Jinkugayan case. But I really do want to be able to compare the two at kind of equal footing.
And what do you have a hunch? What are commonalities there, or what are distinctive differences in both cases?
I think the distinctive difference that I would guess, or that I'm like theorizing,
working hypothesis.
yes, is that so the way that citizens try to resist in Tokyo would actually be quite similar to the ways in which South Africans try to claim their rights in urban space. The means would be different because culturally in South Africa, the overt expression is seen as better, more efficient way of sharing, let's say, your position. And I'm still kind of discovering this kind of ways of contestation here in Japan. So I'm curious about that.
So then in that case, does it make sense to use the South African, the Cape Town case? Because it's overt, so it helps you extract some structure of what resistance looks like, and then you can apply that to the Japanese example that is not overt, but it's there. So maybe it's that something. Because how does this not become a cultural study, for example? Like, if it works with the
Not to say there's anything wrong with the cultural study.
If that's the goal, then that is also another question. If that is the goal, yes, it would be fine. Yes.
I mean, they don't have to be on equal footing. You can just develop the South African case in the beginning, just to develop questions that help you to inform and to look at the Japanese case. And maybe I would also suggest that the meaning of public space is rather different in Cape Town than it is in Tokyo. And you see all these unused parks as well. When we talk about contestations, you need somebody to contest something, but many parks, I'm exaggerating, are empty and are unused most of the time. So, whereas in South Africa, the livelihoods of people might even depend on public space and being visible there, being able there to meet others. So how public space works in a particular society is very different. And by looking at the South African case, maybe you can work out some kind of corner points to make that clear without going into full depth of that.
In the interest of time, I'm going to step in for a moment here, pardon me, and ask if there's anybody online who would like to ask a question or comment to either of our presentations. Haven't heard from anybody participating online, so that's the invitation.
I don't know, it's not nice to handpick, but I think Yasmin might have something to say. Or Ahmad might have something to say because their topics, they are close.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks for putting me into the conversation, Anastasia. Actually, I'm so honored to be present in here, especially of course all the professors and all other academic people that joined and people from all around in the chat from like electric engineering field. Is very interesting that everyone decided to join this type of meeting. So I felt reflected in both presentations a lot because I can see where our researches they connected. So especially the part regarding William White, because I used his methodology in my master thesis at Yokohama National University, and I didn't know. I read his whole book, at least one of them, for the methodology, and I had no idea he had been to Tokyo, and he referred to Konwaziro and other modernologists. So that was very impressive to me. And of course, I found it amusing that in Jessica's case, she already did something that my advisor recommended me to do like 2 weeks ago. So about mapping the relationship between actually it's not exactly what she did, but might be useful to her to try to map the relationship between the actors in a more subjective way. She did like a very interesting diagram with how they their actions are connected, but maybe if she's able to try to map subjectively how they feel about each other, because that was what my advisor recommended me. So just to let people understand what I'm talking about. So my research is mostly about polarization, about public space in my hometown, São Paulo. So we have like a potential High Park who has been in a limbo for almost a decade now. It's a viaduct that half of the people around it want it to be demolished, and the other half wants it to become a High Park forever. And they don't know what to do because it was built in the 70s. So they don't know if they should invest in renewing the structure and keeping it as a high park, or if it's not worth it, or if they should demolish it. And people are completely polarized, and it's also a reflection of Brazilian politics in general. And so the difference between our research topic is that she is talking mostly about like trying to understand the user side and the activist side versus the government side or the private institution side. But in my case, of course I have to get information from those as well to triangulate, but I'm focusing most on people, the users that are divided. So maybe trying to understand, in my case, my advisor recommended me to understand the relationship between these two groups, and also people from the government and people from the academic field regarding the subject. So maybe that also might give her some insight. And let me see. I don't know if that makes sense. Please, Jessica, if you have any question about it or critics about it, please let me know as well.
No, I'm curious about the subjective mapping. So I'm for that. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see what else. I had something else in mind, but it's 5 a.m. here, and my brain is not at its best. 5:30.
Yes, and I'm going to move on because we have other people who'd like to speak.
Sure.
To break very soon. Thank you. Ahmad, do you want to speak?
Yeah. Thank you for the presentations. I found them really interesting. I have some comments. I think some things that to link some parts of the discussion. As in first about the methodology in comparing two separate or different cultures in different contexts, as in how can those be two related? Well, from my research that I'm doing currently on architecture and culture, there are many times that we see, let's say, things occurring that may seem similar or the same, but the core of them are completely different. Thus, the conclusion that we might get from that isn't as straightforward or as comparable in that place. The key for me, at least, on how to deal with such issues is approaching the issue from a cultural perspective, as in from the eyes of from the eyes of the locals of each context. Now, what I find interesting about that is this is where we see the differences in approaches between the local communities and the official decision makers, where the decision makers usually take a modernist approach by the idea of the hand of God on things, as in they look at it from a site plan perspective and they say we need to do that, because this will bring us that and that and that. The same way Professor Dimmer showed in the idea of Le Corbusier's hand of God, for example, in his plan in Paris. Now, I think currently, or this is why I was really interested in the research that Professor Dimmer and Anastasia are doing, is the idea of tracking the non-governmental approaches, or let's say the bottom-up approaches in that sense. I think this provides an alternative approach in such issues, whether it's in architecture or in urban design and urban planning. But what I'm always, let's say, not very straightforward in, as let's say answer-wise, is the basis of the decisions or the things that we base on our decisions on. I tend to take a really bottom-up approach in that, so I separate the cultures in that sense. If I want to make something in Japan, I would take a Japanese bottom-up approach in it. And when I say Japanese bottom approach, I would incorporate the culture, the language, the people, the context of that. And if I'm doing that in Jordan, I would take a Jordanian approach in that sense. So how, or let's say, what are your thoughts on the idea of joining these ethnographic practices, and on what basis are they joined or are they tracked in that sense? And thank you.
I can take that. Yeah. Thank you, Ahmad. First of all, I have to say with Ahmad, we had some discussions on this topic. And already by talking with Ahmad, he has expanded my field by introducing architectural ethnographies from Egypt with Hassan Fati and architecture for the poor and the connection of I don't even want to say ethnography when Professor Slater is here, but like this kind of more detailed observation and visual documentation of the material realm of a community or a city. And I think how things are linked is something that we want to find out by linking them, which sounds a bit strange, but it's this idea that we would like to share an alternative history of practices for architecture and for design and for planning, that they have a different essence if they're being shown as one-offs, that there was this guy in 1925, there were these two guys in 1925, and it's different when we start linking the influence that one practice has on another. And then it becomes something more powerful and it becomes a legitimate history, if I may say, that we can refer to when we want to introduce a design practice. So in that sense, I guess how they are connected is that they usually contain a care and an interest in finding local ways for doing things, like in the case of Hassan Fati that you shared with me, that he was looking into the local ways of building because of the lack of access to resources at that particular moment in time, is something that we're interested in. Or in the case of Konwajiro, that he was able to document an important historical moment, but being an architect and essentially producing a first kind of Japanese architectural drawing. When we see today the drawings of Junya Ishigami or Atelier Bauau, that they're so detailed, this is not a one-off situation. The graphic anatomy of Atelier Bauau is a digital version of Uzo Nishiyama's dwelling studies. So when we know these connections, then we can also feel more agency into also becoming nodes in these maps, that is not just one person somewhere, but it's many people and we're all connected and we learn from each other. I think that's one idea. Sorry, it took a lot, I think.
Well, we're here to talk. 1 second, let me just show one slide. I think it's also important to look at these things in order to reclaim ground that we have lost. For example, I'm very interested in the language of plants as well. This is a plant from 1965 from Yokohama, Shiminga Tsukuta Yokohama no Mirai. So the future of Japan made by the citizens under this socialist mayor who realized that you cannot change Japan in the 1960s from the top. And I would argue maybe it didn't change that much. But we see the brightest graphic designers, the greatest artists, copywriters, planners brought into that particular place. And policies were developed so that ordinary citizens could actually understand what this is all about, and by that enabling them to join. So nowadays, if you talk to people, they say, yeah, it's shogunai, this is Japan, we can't do it, this is how we always did it. And if you go back and you reclaim these things, you can show, wait a minute, in the 60s, 70s, in the 80s, in Setagaya as well. Things are possible if we want that, if we really bring the politicians in, if we vote for the right people, like in Suginamiko now, the new mayor, maybe that can turn into something like that with Nishi Okufu and Koenji and Asagaya and all. So I think that helps. So really going back and filtering these things out and reclaiming lost ground so that we can make up to these practices. Amen.
One more, yes. So quick question for you, Anastasia. Probably 3 slides from the last. There was a list of things that you wanted to probably expand. Sorry, it's a very quick question, but you use the word amateurization of community design, following up on crisis or something. Were you using amateurization as a positive term or negative term? And how much, to what extent does it really apply to your own research? Because this plurality or something that you cross the line, you sort of feel like you become amateur.
I'm an amateur ethnographer. I want to understand it. I know it. It's very important, and I know also my limitations. But nevertheless, I do it.
And I'm not saying that you're amateur or anything.
Oh well, I think for you.
I was wondering how you sort of making the balance between to be an expert on one hand, but I gotta be sort of amateur on the other.
Well, I think for me, it's very conscious. I did my PhD at Todai, so in urban engineering. So I'm expected to teach at a planning school somewhere. But I consciously decided I will teach for the rest of my career, if I may, at the School of International Liberal Arts. Is the only guy who talks about cities and urbanism there, because I want to talk to students who would never get in touch with this stuff in order to really help to cultivate the emergence of some kind of group of people who are literate in these kind of things. And when they go into non-profits or into government or into business, at least they have learned to ask these kind of critical questions, and maybe there will be future opportunities. It's also, so that is my way, my approach to that. Would you like?
Yes, thank you for your question. And I'll share my screen here. This is actually another part of our connection with Professor Dimmer. I read the paper of his in 2016 on placemaking after the Tohoku disaster, and the case of Ishinomaki 2.0 came up. And there was no English literature on that topic up to the moment that Professor Christian introduced it. And then I tried to take it on and see what is this about. And it's a bottom-up practice. Okay. Your screen sharing. Thank you, Lizzie. This is important. Yes. Here, I have this very strong title, non-neoliberal design paradigm, a network of grassroots community building. But what I care most is, I think architects have been very much contemplating their role, and that they feel like they have stopped having influence on social issues. And those things can be explained by being a bit removed from community and working within offices and having certain methodologies of working. But at the same time, the only way that we can go back into being in contact with people is to see how they do things by themselves, and then how we can become mediators of that process. And Ishinomaki 2.0 is a case where a few architects, just enough, would help to do workshops about DIY constructions of a community space called Irori, and the remaking of a bookshop that was destroyed. And architects were there, but they were more helping to take the community to the right direction to rebuild something. And I think in my particular case, I believe more in this methodology. I prefer to learn from, yes, because being an expert as an architect for me has not been very helpful in my own designs. So it's from my personal trajectory as a designer as well.
I think we need to, yeah.
It's great if we're going to stay close to schedule.
Sorry.
Very warm thanks once more to our presenters and to their feedback.